Boy, this is taking a while.
Marion, can you hear me? You can. Oh,
yes.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for standing by, and welcome to the Nuance Empower webinar, Radiology Analytics Best Practices teleconference call. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. If you should require assistance during the call, please press star then 0. I would like to now turn the conference over to our host, Ms. Marianne Besser. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Lena. And welcome, everyone, to this Nuance Diagnostics webinar, Analytics and Radiology in the Era of Value-Based Care. As the operator said, my name is Marianne Besser, and I will be your host for today's webinar. We have a session planned for you that will last about an hour. We will be taking and answering your questions at the end of the session, but please feel free to send in your questions via the Q&A box anytime during the session. Before we begin, let me give you a few important housekeeping tips. Audio for today's webinar is over phone lines only. If you are having a technical difficulty with phone lines, you can send me a chat, or as the operator said, you can press star 0 to reach her, and she should be able to help you. Although the phone lines are on mute, we do welcome your questions. If you have a question at any time, please enter it in the Q&A box, and we will answer it at the end of this session. If we have more questions than we have time, we'll get back to you after the webinar to be sure that your questions don't linger. To answer one question most of you will have, yes, we are recording this event and we'll provide a deck, a PDF of the deck at the end of the session. So let's get started with today's speaker. Woojin Kim is Chief Medical Information Officer at the Healthcare Division of Nuance. He was co-founder, member of the Board of Directors, and Director of Innovation at the Montage Healthcare Solutions, which was acquired by Nuance last year. He has served as an interim chief of division of musculoskeletal imaging, director of Center for Translational Imaging Informatics, and chief of radiography at the Hospital of the University of Pennsylvania. He completed his radiology residency and MSK fellowship training at the Hospital of the University of Pennsylvania. In addition, he completed an imaging informatics fellowship at the University of Maryland, Baltimore VA Medical Center. Dr. Kim has been an active member in imaging informatics with various societies like ACR, SIM, and RSNA, with a focus on data mining, analytics, and machine learning. As we approach and start this webinar, I will let you know it will last approximately 45 minutes, leaving 15 minutes at the end for questions. And we will start the questions immediately after the webinar is complete. Again, feel free to use the question and answer panel to submit questions throughout the presentation. At the end of the presentation, we do have a brief survey that we invite you to participate in, and thank you in advance for your response. And with that, I will hand it over to Dr. Kim. Woojin, you may begin.
All right, thank you. Thank you for that kind introduction. Hello, everyone. Today, what I would do is I'll be giving a presentation on analytics and radiology in the era of value-based care. So let's start this presentation with a question. As CMIO, I get asked this question very often nowadays, as I'm sure you are as well, as you are managing or running or operating a radiology service. What are some of the biggest challenges facing your radiology service today? The volume is increasing. As you know, reimbursement is going down, and there is increasing regulations. And a lot of physicians, including radiologists, are reporting burnout. In fact, if we just look at the issue of burnout a little bit, physician burnout is becoming a major issue. And if you look at this graph, what you'll notice is that the dark blue was the percentage of physicians reporting burnout as of year 2013. The light blue bars show rates in 2017. And what you can see is that they're all getting worse, and radiology is no exception. In fact, there was an article in Mini back in December of 2016 where Dr. Felix Chu looked at particularly and specifically looking at MSK radiologists. And this is, this statistic is, dear to my heart because I'm a muscular radiologist by training myself. And you can see that he reported, apparently, according to his research, 80% of musculoskeletal radiologists are experiencing with some of the breakdowns as shown here. And then, that the competition is increasing over time, And there's a lot of discussion over value and how to demonstrate value. So I think some of these are the challenges that we're facing in radiology today. Now, I know that, it's not the only solution, but I believe one of the solutions to some of these problems that we're facing today is data analytics. And I'm going to go into detail as far as why I believe so. In fact, I'm not alone in thinking that analytics is one of the potential solutions, hence the topic of this today's presentation. There was a recent article in Diagnostic Imaging titled Analytics Can Save Radiology back in 2015. And in that article, there's a quote that says there's significant strategic value in analytics for radiology. Furthermore, there was another quote that says analytics can help you improve efficiency and effectiveness, but if you avoid analytics, you're running the risk of losing contracts. Now, today, nowadays we hear this word a lot, value. We hear this in terms of just medicine, healthcare in general, but radiology is no exception. I'm sure many of you guys are aware of Imaging 3.0 initiative from the American College of Radiology, which is all about value-based imaging. In 2014, there was a JACR article on this very topic where it describes what it called the imaging value chain. Value chain is a concept borrowed from Michael Porter's well-known book, Competitive Advantage, Creating and Sustaining Superior Performance, where each link of the chain represents a discrete number of unique value opportunity activities that can drive competitive advantage. The figure in the article is a schematic representation of this imaging value chain. Now, take a look at what's in the center of this value chain. Interconnected with every link in this chain is data mining and business intelligence, hence highlighting its utmost importance. This, and as you know, that there is, with macro and MIPS from the CMS, our reimbursement will also be value-based, as well as our penalties in the future. If you're not so convinced, there are other quotes from different articles. For example, this is an AdMini article published in February of 2016, where it says analytics is at the heart of value-based care. Another article published a little bit later in June of 2016, where it says in the article 6 Steps to Success in Radiology Data Analytics, it said, as radiology transitions to value-based care, advanced data analytics is no longer an option. Finally, I'd like to share this quote from Ursu from UPMC, who said, you can't push for value-based imaging without having the right sets of measures and analytics in place. Hence, now you can see that, in this value-based era, analytics is playing a very important role. And that's the thing that I wanted to emphasize throughout today's presentation. So let's take the word value. We hear this word value quite a bit, but what is value exactly? Instead of me trying to define that for you, I'm going to take a definition from a well-known book, Big Data at Work by Thomas Davenport. In his book, even though it's a book about big data, he classifies 3 classes of value in this book. Those classes are cost reductions, decision improvement, and improvements in products and services. Now, what is business intelligence and business analytics? Well, for that, let me take a definition from an article published in CIO, Business Intelligence Definition and Solutions. In that article, it has defined business analytics as the following: set of techniques and tools to analyze organizations' raw data into meaningful and useful information to cut costs, improve decision-making, and identify and develop new business opportunities. So let's take the definitions of business intelligence and analytics and put them on one side, on the right-hand side, and then compare them with Davenport's 3 classes of value. When you do this, you notice something very interesting. You notice that they both cut costs, both improve decision-making, and both improve the products and services, including identifying new business opportunities. And there's a tight relationship between value and analytics from this perspective. Now, many of you are probably familiar with this particular equation, value equals quality over cost. And then it's a value equation that has been described often, So for that, you can see that in the equation, quality is an integral part of value equation, where if you increase the quality, you increase the value. So for that, we can use what I like to call quality analytics, and I'll be sharing with you some examples throughout the presentation. And for that, for the quality analytics, you have to analyze the radiology reports. Now, why radiology reports? Because according to many statistics out there, healthcare is no different than other industries outside of healthcare, where that it is widely accepted that approximately 80% of all data remains unstructured. So for us in radiology, you know that one of the main products of radiology is radiology reports. And if you look at the radiology reports, they're unstructured, they're free text. And that comprises the majority of our data. So it is important for us to be able to analyze that unstructured data. So to look for things like, for example, when somebody says 3 views of the left hand were obtained, no acute fracture dislocation of the left hand is seen, but the radiologist was looking at the right hand. Well, or how about this one? The uterus and ovaries are unremarkable. Then you get an angry phone call from your patient, and it ends up being a man on the other end of the phone. And he is very upset about this particular report. Why? Because he's a man and he doesn't have uterus and ovaries. What's worse, what if the radiologist who's dictating this particular report forgot to take out the other part of the macro? And so now he's got both the uterus, ovaries, and prostate and seminal vesicles. Even though a lot of people, when I usually give this type of presentation, I get a little chuckle from the audience when I show this case. But the thing is, when I was once, chief of MSK, I can tell you that a lot of times people would actually, the patients would pick up the phone and call me about errors, and one of the major errors that I get phone calls about are these sex errors in the reports. And these are the reasons why you don't want to make these errors, and also that you need an advanced analytics where you can actually look into the radiology report text. If you're still not convinced, if you look at the ACR's qualified clinical and data registry, and they have what's called a non-PQRS measures for 2016. If you look at this particular table, you'll notice that there are these measures that require some type of advanced analytics because, for example, ACR measure 2, if you look at that, they want you to be able to identify the percentage of exams resulting in recommendations for clinical correlation or additional imaging on the basis of CT colonography report. What about this one, measure 20, percentage of CT exams with contrast performed that resulted in extravasation. Now, unless your CT technologist keeps a meticulous record on the side for all these extravasations, you need the analytics capabilities that can look into the radiology report text itself to be able to mine all the cases that have contrast extravasation. Without that type of capability or system, you won't be able to comply with these measures. The other aspect of radiology reporting I'd like to focus today is follow recommendation. I know there are a lot of abstracts being presented at meetings nowadays and publications on this particular topic. And in the past, radiation dose estimate was a hot topic, and it continues to be so, and, critical results. I believe one of the hottest topics in radiology today, and will be so for the upcoming future, is this whole concept and topic of incidental findings and making follow-ups. And this is another area that NLP, natural language processing, that can be incorporated into advanced text analytics can really help you with this, tackling this issue. So for example, when there is a radiology report, NLP can be used to, say, look for follow-up statements, recommendation statements within the radiology reports, and then be able to extract out various elements of that follow-up statement, such as, the follow-up was recommended, what was the modality, what was the body part, in this case, CT and chest, and in how many months, what was the time interval, in this case, 6 months. And after having done that, the system can then put them all into a database for a work and create a work list so that if this chest CT in 6 months does get performed, then that's great. But if after 6 months, the patient does not come back for that follow-up of the CT of the chest, then it becomes overdue, and then you can do something about it to bring those patients back into your system to make sure that they get their appropriate follow-up. And if you're not convinced yet that the follow-up is indeed a hot topic today and it will be in for the foreseeable future, take a look at this particular thing from ACR. Back in the month of May this year, they opened for public comment these quality measures that they were going to submit to CMS for inclusion into as a part of 2018 NIST measures. And for those measures, they identified 6 measures that they opened for public comment in the month of May, and then they submitted to CMS for inclusion possibly for next year. Now, if you look at the 6 measures, you'll notice something interesting about the measures themselves. First 4 out of 6 measures have something to do with follow-up. So as you can see that the follow-up recommendation is going to be extremely important today and in the future, and you really need to have a robust analytic solution and the workflow and process in place to make sure that you can comply with these various measures, not only for compliance purposes, but also to improve quality within your own practices. Now, let me share this one quote from Edward Deming, who's a well-known quality expert. He's famous for having said, "Uncontrolled variation is the enemy of quality." And let me emphasize the importance of quality analytics using a slightly different approach by sharing with you an example from outside medicine. Gartner Analysis, Doug Laney, shared a list of real-world analytics success stories from the Gartner Business Intelligence and Analytics Summits recently. One of the examples he gave was that of Coca-Cola Company. He said many people think the world's best kept secret may just be the formula for Coke, but it's not. What he learned was that it's also the formula for their orange juice. In fact, the Coke engineers have identified over 600 possible flavors of oranges. What they did was to build proprietary algorithms that would ensure each batch of orange juice to have consistent taste and texture. Why? Because consistency is key. Because consistency is the key to quality and value. And this is how they protect their Minute Maid and Simply Orange brands from unknowns such as orange crowd availability or taste variance from one orange to the next. And they accomplish this product consistency using analytics. Again, consistency results in reduction of variability, which leads to higher quality, which then translates to value. Imagine you buy a bottle of Coca-Cola or a bottle of Minute Maid Orange. The first time you taste it, it tastes great. The second time you purchase it and taste it, it kind of tastes salty or sour. The next time you purchase it, the third time you purchase it, it has a really funky smell to it. Well, what are you going to do about that fourth bottle or fourth, carton? You probably won't buy it because you don't trust that brand. And yet in radiology, we tolerate such a high degree of variability when we expect so much, consistency from a bottle of Coca-Cola, and yet in radiology, we don't expect the same type of quality. If so, can we use analytics to provide product consistency in radiology reporting, and how? Now, there are a series of great articles in JCR titled Speaking of Language, and if you're interested, I would highly recommend you read through them. They're very short, each of them. And one of them was titled Avoid Cannot Exclude Make a Diagnosis. By decreasing the use of such phrase in our reports, radiologists can provide more consistent reports while increasing the value of their reports. Let's say your group has decided after reading this article to reduce the overall usage of cannot exclude in the radiology reports. Can we use analytics to accomplish this? The short answer is yes. Analytics such as text analytics can provide ability for us to review all radiology reports for presence of such phrases, and by analyzing who is using more than others, a particular group can analyze the problem as it stands today, make intervention, and reassess the degree of reduction of variability afterwards. By the way, this graph is a real-life example of performing the cannot exclude analysis for a very large radiology group. What you notice is that there is a great deal of variability amongst radiologists, when it comes to just using this particular phrase. And after you tackle such a problem, you can tackle another one, like this one. Keep as above out of the impression. Just to give you an example of this, imagine, I know as an MSK radiologist myself, I've seen a lot of reports like this, impression, degenerative changes in the lumbar spine as above. Why do we do this as radiologists? Because let's say we have a very complicated, lumbar spine report, and we have described in detail all the findings in L1 to L4, L2, and L2 to L3, and so forth, and we don't want to summarize it for our clinicians, for our colleagues. I can tell you a lot of us do this, but this really doesn't provide quality reports to our referring physicians, because what you're pretty much telling them is, look, for my impression, I'm going to tell you just read the rest of my report, okay? So there's an article like this one, please keep as above out of the impression, and let's say, you decide, can I analyze our reports for this month? And sure enough, you can use advanced analytics to look for as above just in the impression section. Don't need to figure out, who's causing all these types of reports for improved quality. Now, what I want to do for this part, next part of the presentation is, hopefully by now I have convinced you that analytics is an integral part of a imaging value chain, that it is an integral part of delivering value-based care. And so now that, I have shared with you some of these concepts, I want to share with you some of the success stories. So, okay, that's great. I buy it. I understand it. Philosophically, I agree with you. But how are people actually using analytics to truly deliver value? So what I want to do is I want to share with you real-life success stories. Now, I'm going to go back at this equation, value equals quality over cost. And when you can see that to increase value, you have to either increase quality or reduce cost. And at SIM this year, at the conference, there was a whiteboard session where people got together to discuss about, how do I convince the C-suite folks and higher up that I have a great idea to improve the quality, and how do I convince them that this is a project worth doing, but I need support. How do you convince those folks? And I said, one of my responses to that question was, look, what you need to do is that you can't only just talk about improved outcomes and improving quality. Nowadays, you actually have to tie that to improved ROI, because you have to tie that to financial benefit. It's a reality that we live in where cost is a real thing, and it's a thing that people really care about. And this is a lesson I learned, not as an academic radiologist, but as a vendor when I was, running Montage Healthcare. As we were trying to talk to the C-suite folks, they're the ones who said, you know what, that's great that, this product can improve quality and, potentially patient outcomes, but what does it do financially for us? So we learned to combine those two things. And so I gave that response, and then some people tweeted. So this is a screenshot of people tweeting my response to that. So what I'm going to do is, as I share these success stories, I will try to tie in the financial ROI component as well, just to show you that to really, to improve value, that you have to tackle both quality and cost. So the first example I'm going to give is from Dr. Samir Patel. Dr. Patel, if you don't know who he is, he's a well-known radiologist in the area of value-based imaging, ACR, and he has written a number of papers on quality improvement and value-based care. During this, trial period where he tried out an analytic solution for 90 days, he was able to complete not one, not two, or three, but 14 quality improvement projects, and he tweeted about it. And this is a screenshot from his tweet. The only reason I found out about his tweet was because he tagged my name to the tweet message. And so I called up Dr. Patel. I said, hey, Samir, how'd you like using the software for the past 90 days? And he said, quote, I felt like a kid in a candy store. And then in 2016, he gave a presentation at RSNA just last year on some of the quality improvement projects he was able to do. Now, he didn't mention the product by name because it was a CME course, but, he was kind enough to share his slides with us after the presentation. He's now able to analyze radiology reports with gender mismatch information. Now, one of the things you notice about his slides is that for hospital B and hospital C, he doesn't have anything. And the reason is because those two hospitals don't have the advanced analytic solution. Likewise, he is able to now analyze all the critical CT and MRI exams where there is no proper documentation for proper notification. Again, for the hospital VNC, he does not have any insight into it because they don't have the advanced analytics showing the difference. Speaking of financial ROI, you know with ICD-10 transition, it is no longer sufficient for us to simply say that, hey, you know what, 3 views of the hand were obtained. And we used to get paid for that, and that was fine. But with the ICD-10, we have to be more cognizant of documenting proper laterality information in our radiology reports. Now, he presented at RSNA 2016 by using advanced analytics, he can actually now look for laterality errors, and that actually translated to cost savings. And they were saving $27,000 in 1 year just by tackling left and right errors in radiology reports. You know that actionable findings or critical results are a hot topic. They had been for a number of years. At the University of Pennsylvania, this is how they used to do the critical result management and documentations. Prior to Joint Commission visits, someone would print out 1,000 random radiology reports, goes to the back office. University of Pennsylvania at that time had about 24 critical results. But out of the 24 critical results, they would only pick 2 random ones. And then someone would go into the back office and read 1,000 reports and individually say whether there is a critical result, yes or no, whether there is a notification statement, yes or no. They put it in an Excel file, and then they would present it at the time of Joint Commission visit. But you and I both know that 1,000 reports is only a very small sample. This may get you a checkbox from the Joint Commission, but it really doesn't really tackle the quality issue that's tied to the critical results and proper notifications. Fast forward to today, what are they doing? They're using advanced analytics with NLP capability to monitor not 2, but all of their critical results, and not just 1,000 reports, but all of their radiology reports. And when you are able to do that, then you can actually use the analytic solutions to identify things like outliers. Who are your radiologists who tend not to comply with the proper notifications? You are able to look into those problems and be able to improve quality even further. Dr. Syed Zaidi. Now, I'll be honest with you, when I first created an analytic solution, I never thought for the radiologists that they would actually use it to reduce length of stay. But Dr. Syed Zaidi from Altman Hospital in Canton, Ohio, was able to reduce the length of stay at their hospitals by 3 days for a certain select group of patients who are about to go IR procedure, saving the hospital $360,000. So how did they do this? So I can tell you, I'll give you a scenario. What happens typically is that when a patient comes in, say, you know, a body imager sees a CT of the abdomen and pelvis, identifies an abscess in the abdomen, and then says, please get they recommend IR drainage. Well, the intern might read that report sometime later during the day, and then the following morning might present it to the rest of the team that, hey, you know what, the radiologist found an abscess, we need to get an IR drainage, let's schedule that. The attending say, go ahead, please schedule this with the IR group. The intern is so busy all throughout the day, doesn't get to make the phone call until the late afternoon. By that time, the IR schedule is full for the next day. So what they do is they say, you know what, we'll put them on the next day, the first thing in the morning. And what you can see is what Dr. Zaidi did was their group decided any time the radiologist makes a IR recommendation, some kind of procedure recommendation, by end of that day, they would actually contact the team taking care of the patient saying, would you like us to schedule an IR procedure? By doing this proactive maneuver, they were able to save the length of stay for this hospital. Let's take another example of reducing length of stay using something called sequential search. Imagine a patient comes in, let's just, let's say they would detect, an abscess was detected. Well, one particular large academic center wanted to find out in 7 days how many of those patients actually get their abscess drained. And you want to be able to graph it and be able to visualize that data. And when they did, they were actually quite surprised because not every patient got their abscess drained within the first 48 hours. And you can see that there's a great deal of variability. And the chairman, when he saw this graph, he was kind of surprised and said, why do we have such a variability? And so now what they're doing is they're taking this data and trying to figure out how to reduce the variability so that most of their patients can actually get their necessary procedure early and be discharged. Now, when you have the ability to ask questions like this where, hey, show me all the patients who had a study A and study B separated by a certain amount of time, number of hours, weeks, or days, then you could actually be able to ask additional quality improvement questions. For example, how many patients who had a CT of the biopsy then had a subsequent pneumothorax within the first 24, 48 hours, not immediately after the procedure? Or how many patients had breast ultrasound then got a breast MRI within 1 month of each other? Or how many pediatric patients got an ultrasound to evaluate for appendicitis before they got their CT to make sure that they weren't getting radiation unnecessarily? These kinds of analysis can be done very easily if you have that advanced analytics capability. And what about this one? This was a study that was performed in UCLA where they wanted to find out how many times the ED physician first orders a CT of the pelvis, and then less than 24 hours later orders an X-ray of the pelvis. Now, many of us listening to this webinar right now would understand that, I have a question, why don't you get an X-ray of the pelvis right after getting on CT of the pelvis? And in fact, they wanted to tackle this issue, and when they did, they were able to identify that there was indeed an issue. But the thing is, they spent literally weeks and months to analyze this data. Fast forward to today, UCLA and other clients could now perform this type of analysis in a matter of seconds. And speaking of reducing inappropriate imaging, I'm going to refer to another great example from Dr. Zaidi, where they looked and analyzed for RUA-PE studies coming from the ED. And when they analyzed from 2012 to 2014, they found out that average positivity rate was about 11.5%. Well, I'm going to ask you right now, do you happen to know what the average positivity rate for RUA-PE studies at your institution is? Well, they were able to identify that also to be the highest utilizers of RUA-PE studies from the ED were also outliers in terms of lowest positivity rate. They shared this data in co-management fashion with the ED, and in 2015, they were able to increase the positivity rate, and they were also able to get those three outliers from becoming outliers. And by reducing the unnecessary studies, they were able to save the hospital $200,000. So again, I'm trying to tie in the quality improvement concept with the improved ROI. There has been shown that analytics can improve productivity. This is an example from Dr. Browning, who showed 31% increase in productivity using advanced analytic solutions. But this isn't just, limited to our analytic solution. Other people have shown it using analytic solutions where, as some people have shown it as much as 45.5% increase in productivity using advanced analytics. Now, remember the follow-up topic that I mentioned earlier. I emphasized how follow-up is going to be important measures in the future. Well, when you do the analysis, you'll see that, there's a great deal of variability when it comes to follow-up recommendations, right? So, for example, as a patient, imagine you got a study and one radiologist says, please come back for a follow-up recommendation in 6 months for an MRI. When you show the exact same study to another radiologist, the other radiologist said, please come back for a follow-up for ultrasound in 3 months. And as a patient and as a referring clinician, this is extremely frustrating. Why is there no consistency? And this is an actual graph from an academic center that shows the variability when it comes to follow-up recommendations being made by the radiologist. And again, I want to remind you of this quote from Edward Deming. So when it comes to follow-up, what are some people doing? Well, this is a paper from Dr. Cook from University of Pennsylvania. They created their own solution to track follow-up, and when they did, they analyzed 28,000, CT, MRI, and ultrasound studies, and they found out that 11% of the patients had some type of indeterminate finding, but 44% of the patients received no follow-up. And there are articles like this popping up all the time showing that we are really bad as radiologists groups in making sure that these follow-ups get done. In fact, this is an article that showed 33% failure rates. What's probably the scariest is this article published in 2014 that showed 71% of incidentally detected pulmonary nodules are not appropriately followed up, meaning that 3 out of the 4 patients where your radiologist said, please come back in 6 months for that repeat CT of the chest, never come back. And that's a staggering statistics. And this is what scares folks, both in radiology as well as C-suite. This is an unfortunate real-life case in 2015 that shows a speculated, lung mass in the left apex. When the radiologist went back, he saw 7 years ago that there was a CT that said, please come back in 3 months. Now, this patient got every other study, ultrasound, CT of the abdomen, chest x-ray, but one study he never got was that CT of the chest that the radiologist recommended. And you know that this can lead into serious medical legal issues. In fact, there was a recent case in Illinois that was set up for $2.5 million for failed follow-up of lung nodule. And at Nuance, what we do is during the pre-sale process, we do something called a health check. And the health check analysis, we look at various measures, and one of the things we look at is follow-up of pulmonary nodules. And many of you might be listening to this presentation, might be thinking like, hey, you know what, we've got to be better. Our group, it's got to be better than 71% failure rate. Well, I can tell you, this is a sample of 14 academic and private practices. And what you can see is that the average failure rate is 68%, very close to the figure we're seeing in literature. And we know that these pulmonary nodules have 6 to 28% probability of malignancy, hence highlighting their importance. And if you look at the other side, remember the financial ROI. So what is the financial ROI component when it comes to follow-up recommendation? So imagine when a radiologist said, please come back for a 6-month follow-up. And if the person doesn't come back for a follow-up, guess what? That's a potential technical and professional revenue that your practice could have collected but failed to do so because the patient did not come back. In fact, when we had done an analysis at a very large private practice, they had a failure rate of 80% during a 6-month period. That translated to $287,000 that they could have collected, but they failed to do so. So imagine even recovering, 30% of this, not only improves patient care, but it could have really a significant impact on your bottom line. And for those of you who might be saying, well, then I have to, hire extra people to, make sure that these follow-ups get done, and that, requires a lot of manpower. And I don't know if we want to be able to do that. Well, there's a paper, a study that was shared at ACR earlier this year. They did this manually, by the way, and University of Rochester, and they assigned 0.25 FTE, and they were able to recover 153 additional exams. And by doing this, they were able to calculate that they had a return ROI of 4x. So there is a financial benefit to doing this. And I'm going to end this presentation by sharing with you this particular slide. This slide shows you, one of the things I like to do is, I like to see how people are actually using Empower, right? And so what I do is Google Scholar, and I just kind of look to see how many people have published papers using Empower. And for research purposes and quality improvement purposes, what you see is that there is a sudden increase in the number of publications being published using advanced analytics. And you can see that, we haven't even finished 2017, and there are already 30 papers out there that have used advanced analytics for both research and quality improvement. So let me show you this slide where, there's a cartoon, the overall cartoon that says use the CRS database to size the market, that data is wrong. Then use the SIBS database, that data is also wrong. Can you average them? Sure, I can multiply them too. And this cartoon, I'm using it to highlight the importance of data integrity. If you put garbage in, you're going to get garbage out. And you hear this quite often. This is also true when it comes to radiology. And I know we've been talking about technology a lot, but I like this quote from Dr. Markle, who says analytics is not a technology issue, it's about people, because analytics solution can show all kinds of problems, but it's really the people that's going to make the process changes necessary to take the insight into action. So let me finish off with this final slide with this quote from Edward Deming: quality is everyone's responsibility. And with that, I'd like to conclude and open up to questions and Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Very informative session. And we do have some questions that have come in throughout the webinar. I'll start with one from Wendy. She asked, you had mentioned garbage in, garbage out when it comes to analyzing data. What are some practical things we can do to minimize this for the radiology report text?
Great question. So as mentioned in one of the slides, consistency is the key. So let's take some examples. For critical result notification documentation, if you watch the radiologists and see how they dictate time and date and time, for example, you see great variability. Some people will say 5 p.m., some people will say 0500, some people say 1700, etc. Thing is, one can say standard macro to standardize reporting of date and time. And in fact, there, for example, in Power 360, there's automated macro that you can insert at time of insertion that will actually timestamp it for you, so you don't have to deal with this. But having this type of consistency will allow you to have a consistency, but also it allows to make sure that the radiologists actually include the date and time when they do this. When you take an example of ultrasound abdomen and complete versus omitted, one of the required anatomies include common bile duct. However, if you look at the radiology reports, which I have for dozens of sites, it's really interesting. Even as a radiologist, fellow radiologist, I can say, there are like 10 different ways to people dictate the structure. Some will say, even say common hepatic duct. But here's the thing: common hepatic duct, by the way, is not the same as common bile duct. And so, to reduce the confusion and make our coders' jobs easier and make sure that we get paid properly, one of the things is you can make sure that the ultrasound abdomen uses standard macro template. I know a lot of people, radiologists are, sort of against standard reporting, and I understand the hesitation. And so, but there are certain things, areas that standard templates can really help, taking an example like ultrasound and abdomen pelvis, for example. And finally, a lot of analytics solutions, including ours, leverage the metadata tied to the radiology report. So I, really encourage your group to make sure that your metadata are clean. Having a complete and accurate charge master helps. It is incredible to see how many sites have inaccurate and incomplete charge master. Also have a clean list of procedure codes and exam description, not thousands with duplicates, because that's going to really make the analysis analytics difficult. And make sure that they all have the correct modality. For example, if you actually code a mammogram as MR, guess what? You won't be able to get that study included in your mammogram or MR analysis. So all of this contributes to garbage in and garbage out. So those are some of the things that I can really quickly tell you how I can, for example, improve practically the quality of reports. Next question.
Great. We've got a couple of different questions. They're all kind of similar in nature. Who should have access to the analytics? Should only some people have access? Should everyone have access? And then one final one that they're concerned about people checking up on each other. Do you have any advice?
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, we deal with this all the time. And in fact, when it comes to this question, there are actually two camps to this question. Some groups believe that giving access leads to improved productivity and creativity towards improving the practice, right? Everybody has their great ideas, so when they're able to use the analytics, they might be able to discover areas of improvement. And so give them the tools to improve their workflow. Then there's the other side, other camp that says, it's going to only foster people checking up on each other. Hey, I think, radiologist, next to me always leaves at, 4:30 p.m. and I think, he leaves cases for other people. I'm going to check on his productivity and, his reading patterns. Well, yeah, that's the kind of thing that you don't want to, encourage. So I can say, only thing I can say right now is that your group's culture the best. And some sites definitely restrict analytics access to admins only, for example, like section chiefs, chairs, administrators, where QC, quality control aspect of the analytics, might be limited to only the quality officer. Now, one of the slides I did show you the effect of Hawthorne effect, where people's behavior changes when they know they're being watched. So I think there is definitely some benefit in sharing this analytics data with a group of people. So the recommendation I like to give is you can start slow. So, first limit the access to a small group of people, and then slowly just kind of expand it based on, what people, give input. And you might want to include another group of, subgroup of, radiologists into analytics, for example. So I think you can slowly expand it. So you can start slow, and then you can always, go back and forth. So one of the things that you definitely want to ask for your analytics vendor, including ours, is, well, can you kind of control who has access to what part of the application? Next question.
Great. Here's another one from Ryan. Catching all these errors in reports and sending out addendums is fine, but how do you reduce these errors going forward? Can you give us some examples on how people have reduced laterality, sex, and U.S. complete versus limited errors?
Great questions. So on a more practical level, there's some of the things that you can do, but some quick things that you can do right now is for laterality. You know, for example, if you're using if you're a Power 360 reporting customer, you can use things like merge fields to, you know, take in the, you know, the laterality information, or to tie in, they have the newest version have these tying fields where if somebody left on the first, the empty field, that it would actually populate all the rest of the fields that are supposed to say left automatically, so that they, you know, the left that you set in the history section matches the left in the impression section, so you don't have to multiple, you know, times insert that lateral information. So some of that could really help. And then also for, you know, sex errors, you know, avoid having templates where you have both the prostate and the vesicles and uterus and ovaries, because what happens a lot of times is the radiologists sometimes forget to actually delete the other parts. And then then it becomes a really awkward situation. So make sure that your templates are being used properly and that they're created in a error, you know, sort of reducing error prone type of way. And then for the ultrasound, I definitely recommend using a template, because I have analyzed sites where they have actually ultrasound errors, and when I look at them, most of them are because, you know, a site would have a dedicated macro, but certain radiologists would not use that macro and just kind of free text and generate reports. And when they do that, they invariably forget to mention one of the body parts. And as you know, for those of you who code ultrasound at complete versus abdomen, you know, limited, that if you forget to mention just one body part, then it becomes a limited study. And you can lose, you know, a significant amount of money by doing that. So I definitely recommend using a template for that. Any other questions?
Yeah, there's a couple more, and I'm just going to type in. Anybody who wants to ask further questions, please just enter them in the Q&A tab. We'll answer as many as we can within the time that we have. Larry asked, on one of your slides, you'd mentioned something about a health check. What is that, and can you tell us more about it?
Great question. So, you know, obviously, you know, when I try to do these webinars, you know, I come from an academic radiology background, so I've been on the side of the radiologist side of things, as well as, you know, having run a company, I also understand the vendor side of things. So I try to make my webinars not like too much like a sales, you know, pitch type of thing. So I briefly mentioned the health check, and one of the things that Nuance does as part of the Empower is that if you're interested in this product, but you kind of want to know, like, give a little test run or be able to analyze, you know, how dirty is our data or how bad are we exactly when it comes to some of these quality metrics, can you show us? And one of the things we can do is actually during the pre-fill process, one of the services we provide is this thing called health check, where we actually go in and take your own data, usually about 12 to 2 years worth of data, and then run various analyses, things like, you know, pulmonary nodule follow-up failures. So we can tell you how much you're potentially losing because of not following. Ultrasound abdomen complete versus limited analysis, and the cost loss of revenue analysis for that. And who are the radiologists who's making the errors? And length of stay analysis that I gave you an example of, access to drainage by number of days and percentages we can use. And as part of the analysis, we also look at the critical results, volume, and communication rate, and also able to show you who are the radiologists who do not comply for this. And the RUA PE studies from the ED, we can actually analyze the positivity rate per ED doc. And we also look at left and right errors as well as sex errors. In radiology reports, their overall frequency and broken down by radiologists who make them. And the follow recommendations, one of the things I didn't show you is that we actually have the ability, our application has the ability to tell you if a radiologist hedges or not. What I mean by hedging is, you know, say follow-up in 6 months is recommended if clinically indicated. Well, that if clinically indicated is hedge statement. The reason why this is important is if somebody's hedging, that means they might not be following an appropriate guideline because they're just kind of guessing. And so we can actually show you the hedging rate per radiologist. And finally, I showed you that example of cannot exclude. That kind of gives you a little bit of insight into the variability amongst your radiologists when they come to radiology reports. And so we include that into the analysis. So those are all the metrics that we include as part of the health check. So if you're interested, you know, definitely reach out to one of us after the webinar, and we'll give you more information and set you up.
Great. Okay, we have a question from Ara. He said, we probably have thousands of patients at our hospital who have not had their follow-ups done. How do you practically tackle and manage such a large work list?
Yeah, So as much as, I like to promote the importance of follow recommendations from patient safety, malpractice, medical, legal, and financial perspective, I'll be honest with you, it is a huge problem because radiologists, we know that, we make recommendations anywhere from 10 to 20% of the time of the generated radiology reports, and that leads to a lot of radiology reports that contain some kind of follow recommendation. So the question is, when you turn this on, by the way, let's say you have an analytic solution that can, detect these follow recommendations within radiology reports like ours, you'll notice that you suddenly see thousands of patients who have not come back for that follow-up. And it could be very, very, you'll be surprised, but also you'll be very overwhelmed, and it's totally understandable. And so one of the things that we've been doing as we try to work this with some of the early adopters is start small. So start with things like pulmonary nodules. With the lung cancer screening and pulmonary nodules, that's an important topic. And so you can start with just the pulmonary nodule failures. And so that's a much more manageable list. And then let's say afterwards, once you have a workflow get going, then you can tackle, say, mammograms. I was quite surprised to see how many sites, despite having a dedicated, some type of mammography module, that they had all these patients being leaked in terms of not being followed up. So, for example, BIRAS-3, they recommend a 6-month follow-up. Well, are they all coming back to you on getting their 6-month follow-up? Well, apparently a lot of patients are not, so that's maybe another area that you can tap into. So I would just kind of start small, tackle one area, and then add one at a time, and that would be the recommendation that I have. Because, yeah, once you turn this thing on, you'll see thousands of patients, and the list could be overwhelming. But if you can start small, that would really help. Any other questions?
Yeah, how about this one? You didn't talk about artificial intelligence, but can you tell us how you see AI playing a role in radiology analytics?
So during the introduction, there was a mention of, one of my interests being machine learning and artificial intelligence. So that's an area of great interest to me, and I've given a number of talks on that topic as a result of it at various meetings. So I didn't go into it at this particular presentation, but when it comes to AI in radiology, we tend to have this tunnel vision in radiology where, you get a group of, radiology folks, whether administrators or managers or technologists, quality officers or radiologists themselves, and you ask them about AI, and their first knee-jerk response is image characterization. Oh, that AI algorithm that can detect pulmonary nodules for me. But the thing is, there's much greater potential when it comes to AI and radiology in other areas, including analytics. For example, there was a recent article, very nice article, on predicting no-shows. And I know no-show is it's an important issue when it comes to running a radiology practice. And so being able to predict no-shows can really have a positive impact in operations. And that's an area, for example, AI can play a role in. So there are definitely other areas. And by the way, with nowadays, with all these, frameworks that are open source and freely available, a lot of people can actually code this in a matter of, just using a few lines of code. So you can definitely play with this concept on your own as well. Great. So we're close to the end of the hour, so that's, I guess we can.
Yes, I think that we can end it there. Anyone who asked a question that we didn't answer, we will answer those questions and get back to you, so just be patient. It'll take a little while to answer them. We thank you for attending our webinar today and hope you found it informative. I will again mention that there will be a little pop-up survey that should appear on your screen. We certainly appreciate your feedback on those questions, and we will share results with anyone who fills out the survey as well. So thank you again. We appreciate you taking time to join us today. Thank you, Woo-Jin, for a great presentation and the great questions that came afterwards. So have a great day, and we hope to see you soon at an event, at a webinar, or perhaps at RSNA. Be sure to stop by our booth. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude your conference for today. Thank you for your participation and for using AT&T Executive Teleconference Service. You may now disconnect.